I'ma be honest, I can't seem to formulate an appropriate introduction to this video. I mean, I could already see the comments roasting me for not doing something more academically rigorous, like making a video on Hegel, which will never come out by the way. And what is this talk of Bruce Lee? He isn't a philosopher, he was a fighter. Well friends, allow me to try and sell you on this video idea before we actually get into the content. Let me try to sell you on why we could learn some things from Bruce Lee about philosophy. So Bruce Lee is a craftsman in the sense that he created his own style of martial arts known as Jeet Kune Do. After all, fighting might be considered a craft. But you know what also might be considered a craft? Possibly philosophizing. I mean, think about yourself for a minute and the values you hold and the philosophical traditions you're interested in. Isn't this process of learning, applying, and practicing philosophy a sort of craft in itself? You ultimately are the one who chooses what to apply to your life. You get to structure your way of thinking based on what you learn. So my question is, what if we apply Bruce Lee's philosophy behind martial arts to philosophy itself? Is that good enough? Do I have you hooked? No? Well shoot, let me hit you with this then. Bruce Lee and philosophy are not completely separate. He was a student of philosophy and was heavily influenced by Eastern philosophy, specifically Taoism. As a matter of fact, the book I'm going to be reading from by Bruce Lee is the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. And yeah, Bruce Lee wrote a book. Now what's interesting is that the philosophy of Jeet Kune Do has a lot of Eastern philosophical influence, which hopefully will become apparent. So rest assured any hyper-academic people out there that this video isn't just me using Bruce Lee's name for views. There is actually something here that I think might be helpful in our own journey into philosophy. I will admit though, it is Chinese New Year and I'm unable to celebrate it this year because my family's all separated. So making this video is part of my own Chinese New Year celebration. That along with maybe some dumplings. So as mentioned earlier, Jeet Kune Do is a fighting style created by Bruce Lee, and in a nutshell, it is not so much a rigid set of techniques based on a tradition, but rather it is a practical fluid style that takes what's useful from other forms of martial arts. Now I'm going to break this video down into two parts. Number 1 regards identity, and number 2 focuses on practicality. So think about identity when it comes to philosophical schools of thought. You often hear people say things like, oh yeah, I'm a Stoic, or I'm a Nietzschean, or I'm a Cyrenaic. Just kidding, no one ever says that one. But you know what I'm saying, people interested in philosophy tend to associate themselves with a certain school, and then wear that label around like they're the cool kid at school. You know, that one kid whose mom packed them Lunchables while you're stuck with a PB&J? And then you get these debates breaking out between different ideologies from representatives of different schools, and you know how it is. What if, however, one abandons the identity and instead takes on a formless form, so to speak? What if instead of coming across something from a Stoic point of view or an Epicurean point of view, you instead set those ideas aside for now to really engage with what's at hand? To quote Lee from his book, "Empty your cup so it may be filled. Become devoid to gain totality." This self-identification of ourselves with a certain school can sometimes blur the actuality of an issue. Now, it can be helpful to apply a certain school of thought to a specific issue and see how it plays out. But in this case, the event precedes the ideology. For many, though, the ideology precedes the event, which leads to an obfuscation of some elements of the event. Here's Lee again talking about this distortion. Instead of facing combat in its suchness, then, most systems of martial arts accumulate a fancy mess that distorts and cramps their practitioners and distracts them from the actual reality of combat, which is simple and direct. Instead of going immediately to the heart of things, flowery forms, organized despair, and artificial techniques are ritualistically practiced to simulate actual combat. Thus, instead of being in combat, these practitioners are doing something about combat. Now one might consider all this and come to the conclusion that all these systems offer nothing and it's just a waste of time. But this is actually far from the case. I mean, if that were the case, this channel would be redundant. The point here is not to disregard any and all schools of thought. The point is not to be dogmatic and attached to a school. Don't think of things from the perspective of a school. Look at a school from the perspective of the thing itself and see if it can apply. This leads us to the next part, which is practicality. Now, I don't know much about fighting, but I hear some people describe Jeet Kune Do as mixed martial arts. Here's a quote from Lee which I couldn't find in the book but perfectly encapsulates the general idea here. Absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. To To me, this sounds a lot like the philosophy of pragmatism, not so much focusing on the objective truth, but rather what is useful to us, what can solve problems. So in Jeet Kune Do's case, Bruce Lee took from all these different schools of fighting, Wing Chun, Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, etc. He took what worked for him, discarded what wasn't working, then added some of his own stuff in the mix. So imagine applying this to philosophy. You could take what works for you from Stoicism, what works from Nietzsche, maybe a dash of Epicureanism here and there, a little absurdism, and maybe some of your own ideas to fill in the blanks. But by taking parts, you don't have to assume the whole for your identity. For instance, I love Nietzsche. I definitely take a lot of things from him, but there are some things I have to disagree with. Here's one last quote to solidify this idea. Jeet Kune Do favors formlessness so that it can assume all forms, and since it has no style, Jeet Kune Do fits in with all styles. As a result, Jeet Kune Do uses all ways and is bound by none, and, likewise, uses any technique or means which serve its end. In this art, efficiency is anything that scores. Well, hopefully you got something out of this. It is one way to approach the application of philosophy. It's very eclectic, it's focused on practicality, and it's very individual. Sorry for the delay in videos, it's a pretty busy week here with class and everything. But hopefully we could pick up the pace a bit. Hit the subscribe, like, and bell button to give me some motivation. I hope you all have a very happy Chinese New Year, and hopefully the year of the ox is going to be better than last year.